It has been established by modern science that in all physical processes, every ordered system tends over time to become more disorganized, and also to lose energy in the form of heat, and to slow down. In other words, everything gets old and wears out or runs down. This process is called entropy. It is described in physics by the second law of thermodynamics. These laws were not discovered until the 1800s, after much tedious research and experimentation. But we see these laws clearly stated over 2,800 years earlier in the Bible. In Psalm 102, verses 25 through 27, we read, "In the beginning you, that is God, laid the foundations of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you remain. They will all wear out like a garment. Like clothing you will change them, and they will be discarded. But you remain the same, and your years will never end." This verse states clearly that the earth and the heavens, including the heavenly bodies by implication, are in the process of perishing and wearing out and wearing down. In the 1st century AD, the Apostle Paul proposes the same idea when he writes in Romans chapter 8, verses 20 and 21, "For the creation was subjected to frustration, in hope that the creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay." This truth, the decay of all creation, or the second law of thermodynamics, was stated by Paul 1,700 years before it would be scientifically discovered to be true. So the Bible accurately describes the modern laws of increasing entropy or thermodynamics, as the entire material universe relentlessly runs down and loses available usable energy in a process of decay. It is interesting to note also that this truth of hard science and the Word of God, the laws of thermodynamics, this truth is quite the opposite of the modern fairy tale of evolution, which says that over millions of years everything has been and still is in a state of upward evolution and progression. But in order for evolution to be true, entirely new laws of the universe apparently have to be invented to contradict the known and scientifically accepted laws of the universe, the laws of thermodynamics. But how could the psalmist 3,000 years ago and the Apostle Paul 2,000 years ago, how could they have known that everything in the universe, including the stars themselves, are winding down and burning out, unless the God that set it all in motion revealed this truth to them? Hydrothermal vents, or springs of water emanating from the depths of the oceans, are described in 2 books of the Bible written before 1400 BC, in other words, more than 3,000 years before their discovery by science. In Genesis chapter 7, verse 11, we read that in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, the 17th day of the month, on that day all of the fountains of the great deep were broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. And in Job 38:16, God challenges Job, "Have you entered the springs of the sea, or have you walked in search of the depths?" In the 1960s, this phenomena, the springs of the deep, or hydrothermal vents, was first discovered by deep-sea exploration. Yet their exact nature was just beginning to be explored and cataloged. It wasn't until 1979 when biologist and scientist Peter Lonsdale published the first scientific paper on hydrothermal vent life. But thousands of years earlier, the Bible had spoken of the springs of the deep. In Psalm chapter 8, verse 8, the Bible speaks of the fish and all of the creatures that swim in the paths of the sea. How could King David know that the oceans and the seas had paths in them, and that the fish were prone to habitat these areas? He wrote this truth some 3,000 years ago and probably never actually saw an actual ocean. Modern fishing boats now make good catches in the currents or the paths of the sea. They have learned that this is where the fish swim. These ancient words were written in about 1000 BC. It would be over 2,000 years later before we have the very earliest of records that man actually discovered that the sea had literal circumventing currents or paths. Although others had written about the phenomena of the paths of the sea in the 1600s, it wasn't until 1860 when a modern pioneer in oceanography, Matthew Fontaine Maury, called attention to the fact that the ocean was indeed an entire circulating system containing many paths of the sea. His book on physical oceanography is still a highly regarded source of information on this science today. This certainly is a fascinating fact, when one considers that the Bible had declared all of this nearly 3,000 years earlier. Until modern times, people thought the ocean floor was sandy like the desert and saucer-shaped, deepest in the middle. This was even true of the pre-1900 geologists. But in the 1900s, oceanographers found the sea had many deep valleys or canyons. The deepest canyons were called trenches. The Marianas Trench in the Pacific is so deep that if Mount Everest, which is 29,000 feet high, was dropped into it, the peak would still be a mile below the water's surface. There are also underwater mountains. The Atlantic Ocean contains an undersea range of mountains over 10,000 miles long. But 3,000 years ago, the Bible spoke of the valleys and mountains of the sea. In Psalm 18 verse 15, David wrote of God being the creator of the valleys of the sea. In Job 38 verse 16, God asked Job, "Have you walked in the recesses or the valleys of the sea?" The prophet Jonah was thrown off a ship and spoke of falling to the bottom of the mountains in the sea in Jonah chapter 2. The Bible spoke of the valleys and the mountains of the sea thousands of years before scientists discovered them and cataloged their actual existence. How could the writers of the Bible have known these amazing facts concerning oceanography thousands of years before their actual discoveries? Unless, of course, the God who created these things revealed them to the writers.